When my mum was battling cancer, she was often so riddled with pain that it took more than half an hour to get out of bed. Dad had to patiently lift her up and then let her back down again, over and over, until she was in a position that she could get up with the least pain. I remember introducing Mum to my spiritual mother in the hope that she would help with Mum's anger with God and life in general. Adelia suggested to Mum that she should offer up her suffering. Unsurprisingly, Mum's response was one of anger. For to offer up one's suffering is to accept it, and she wasn't in the right place at that particular time to be able to do that. As a typical hard-working Sicilian mother, the only thing that Mum asked of God was the strength to do her work. She didn't ask to be healed, but to accept and offer up her suffering for who knows what was too big an ask. Brothers and sisters, in today's second reading, St. Paul tells us, "It makes me happy to suffer for you, as I'm suffering now, and in my own body to do what I can to make up all that is still to be undergone by Christ for the sake of his body, the church." This is a profound statement in so many ways. Firstly, what suffering does Jesus still need to undergo? And how does St. Paul's personal suffering affect that? As God and man, Jesus' suffering and death was sufficient to make full atonement to God for every man or woman that ever existed or will exist. But if we look closely at what St. Paul is saying, it is not that he's saying Jesus' suffering was insufficient at the time of his crucifixion and death, but that Jesus fulfills all the suffering necessary for the atonement of sin for all of humanity from the beginning to the end, through us who actively participate and share in his suffering. In other words, he makes us Christians cooperators in salvation. Brothers and sisters, St. Paul, in actively participating in Jesus' suffering for humanity, offers to us a guidepost on what we should do as Christians with our own suffering. Personally, I don't know anyone who has no suffering, so we all have something to offer up together with Christ. When Adelia was suggesting to my mum that she should offer up that suffering, she was trying to teach my mum that there are actually two types of suffering. The first is useless, as it comprises murmuring and complaining about our lot, pointing at others, and in the process, losing the opportunity of participating in Christ's suffering for the salvation of the world. In today's Gospel, we see Martha express verbally her suffering to Jesus as she's doing all the work on her own. But instead of offering it up with love for Christ and his body, the church, she murmurs against her sister, thus incurring a rebuke from Jesus. The second type of suffering, on the other hand, bears much fruit and is very grace-filled. In the first reading, we see Abraham at the entrance of his tent in the hottest part of the day. Firstly, he's not found complaining about the heat. Then, when the three men appeared, he didn't complain, saying something like, they could have come in the morning or the evening when it was cooler. But instead, he jumped up and at once sought to water, feed, and comfort the unexpected guests. He laid the best of what he had before them. No doubt it would have caused suffering, but it appears that he offered it up quietly. Today we also celebrate the feast of St. Elijah the prophet, whose statue we have here in the church, who suffered more than him, yet he continued in his service to God and of course humanity, without even knowing that he was making up what was still to be undergone by Christ. Brothers and sisters, it is much easier to speak about offering up of suffering, especially if one hasn't had to deal with deep suffering themselves, than to do it in reality. As I said earlier, suffering of one way or another is unavoidable. Sarah and Abraham had to suffer not being able to have children for decades of their married life. Martha had to suffer being corrected by Jesus. Mary had to suffer being criticized by her sister. Elijah had to suffer being persecuted by all the prophets of Baal and the king of Israel. What do we do with our suffering, brothers and sisters? This is the important question for each and every one of us. For we must never forget that the path to heaven is strewn with suffering that has been offered up. As Jesus said, "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Brothers and sisters, whatever it is that you are suffering, offer it up. Offer it up right now for your spouses, your children and grandchildren, your friends and enemies alike, so that in doing so you can help make up all that is still to be undergone by Christ for the sake of his body, the church. Who knows what graces will come for those you love in the acceptance of your lot.